Welcome to Clear the Air with me, Angela Lim, medical doctor and co-founder of ClearHead, an innovative employee wellbeing platform. Clear the Air is a podcast covering those experiences in your life or questions you have that you feel too vulnerable to share with those around you, such as, why do I feel so lonely? And what can I do to feel happier? We get real and raw on these existential questions on mental health and well-being that's puzzled humans for millennia, sharing the science behind what you're experiencing and the answers behind those questions. Sleep is the very center of our well-being. Getting a good night's rest is crucial for both the body and mind, allowing us to repair, reset, and be ready for whatever the day throws at us. In this session, we will be joined by sleep specialist Dr. Michael Breus to learn about the relationship between sleep and mental health and unpack how to set ourselves up for a good night's sleep every night. Michael is a double board certified clinical psychologist and clinical sleep specialist who has been in private practice for 23 years. He is the founder of sleepdoctor.com, and for over 14 years, he serves as the sleep expert for WebMD. Recently, he was named the top sleep specialist by Reader's Digest. His expertise lies in the science of sleep and peak performance, as well as treating sleep disorders such as sleep apnea, narcolepsy, insomnia, restless leg syndrome, and more. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Angela. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, maybe let's start off with you sharing with us a little bit about what got you on this journey to be a sleep specialist.
Yeah. So it was weird, okay? Like you don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I want to be a sleep doctor, right? That really isn't usually what happens. So what's so fascinating for me anyway was I actually didn't start out wanting to be a sleep doctor. I actually wanted to be a sports psychologist. So I was in graduate school at the University of Georgia getting my Ph.D. in sports psychology, and the best residency/internship that you could get, I couldn't get into. It was at the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson, Mississippi, and it was looking at eating disorders in athletes. And I thought that would be a really good way to combine my two interests. And but I couldn't get in. Only the Harvards and the Princetons and the Yales of the world got in. You guys made it in. I went to the University of Georgia. Not Harvard, but it was a top 20 program. But they had a sleep track where they were looking for somebody who was willing to spend 6 months of their time in the sleep laboratory. Then they would pay for them for the entire year. Well, I had worked my way through graduate school in the electrophysiology department. So I was the guy who would take apart all the machines and put them back together so that the experiments could kind of be run. I was kind of like the weirdo, wonky kind of mechanical guy. And they used the same machines for sleep as I already knew how to use. So I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to fake it. I'm going to tell them I'm coming in for the sleep thing, and then I'm going to transfer as soon as I get there. So I convinced them that I'm their sleep guy. I get the internship. I go there day one, hand in the air. Yes, Dr. Breus, what can we do for you? I'd like to transfer over to the eating disorders program. They said, Dr. Breus, we had a feeling that you were going to do this. So here is what we're going to offer you. If you want to stay in the sleep track for 6 months, it will pay for your entire year. And then we will let you do the other 6 months in the eating disorders track if that's what you want to do. I was like, fantastic. How hard could this be? It's sleep, for gosh sakes, right? So I got there. Let me tell you something, Angela. By the third day, I absolutely fell in love with clinical sleep medicine. And I'll tell you why. I help people like this. It's unbelievable. When you change someone's sleep, you change their life. It's remarkable. Really very few other specialties can you have this great of an impact at such a significant level to affect everything else that's going on. And, I love the fact that you wanted me to be on your show because it's rare that I actually get a chance to talk about how sleep affects mental health and the importance of that relationship. Most of the time people are just like, hey, Michael, how do I sleep better? Which, by the way, is not a bad thing to learn how to do. But there's such an important tie in to this. I would argue, Dr. Angela, that 75% of insomnia is anxiety or depression. And the other 25% is a mix of environment, doing stupid things like drinking caffeine at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, medical problems, things like that are making up the other 25%, but 75% of insomnia for sure is anxiety, depression, or fear based. No question about it. And I really like what I do. I'm super passionate about it. And I really get a chance to do some interesting stuff. Like I get a chance to write books. I'm on TV all the time talking about sleep. I got this crazy website. So I feel really fortunate, that I kind of fell into this area and I've become such an advocate for it. And here's the best part for me. My son says this. He told me this the other day. I thought it was really interesting. He said, "Dad, you have the best social hack in the world." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I've watched you." He said, "Every time you go to a party, the second somebody finds out you're a sleep doctor, you can talk to anybody in that party that you want, because a circle forms around me and people just start asking me questions, right? Because when do you get a chance to meet a sleep specialist until you're in their office? Right. So
Exactly.
I love the
You're
advocacy.
definitely.
I like talking about it. I like helping people. It's really been a wonderful field for me.
I love how passionate you are even after 23 years. I could just still sense it off the screen. So that's amazing.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's so funny because it's like everybody has a question, right?
100%. So let's get into, I guess, what you defined, which is you said that you got into clinical sleep. What does clinical sleep even mean?
Yeah, great question. So when we were doing the rotation and then you started doing clinical sleep medicine. So right after I got out of graduate school, I had got my first job as the clinical director of a sleep laboratory just outside Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I'm from. And when you're practicing clinical sleep medicine, it's exactly like being a regular doctor. You have office hours, people come in, but the only topic that you're usually talking about is sleep. So quality of sleep, quantity of sleep. We identify things like sleep apnea, narcolepsy, insomnia. And what's interesting is every single sleep disorder has some form of a mental health component to it. As an example, for sleep apnea, as an example, we have a lot of fear. People don't want to wear a CPAP mask. They're afraid of wearing this thing on their face at night. People are fearful of going in and getting a sleep study. People become anxious and that prevents them from falling asleep. That's called insomnia. People wake up in the middle of the night. They start to become anxious. They can't fall back asleep again. So it's just this constant barrage of mental health. And a lot of people don't even think of sleep as a mental health kind of issue, but of course it is.
Yeah. So maybe talk us through, as you said, 75% of the sleep issues tend to be mental health, has a mental health foundation behind it.
Yep.
How do you move forward with once you find that out?
Yeah, great question. So as an example, well, number one, I talk a lot about this in my new book, Sleep, Drink, Breathe, which is out December 3rd. So if folks get an opportunity, please swing by and grab it. We'll put in the show notes, we'll put a link to it. So like when I walk in through the door and I'm trying to understand what's kind of going on with their sleep, it's just a diagnostic process, right? But what do I really do? What I'm a specialist in is cognitive behavioral therapy. So when you look at the data and you look at, for example, pharmacology versus CBT for insomnia, CBT actually wins every single time. And it wins for the long term as well. Let me explain.
And maybe just to kind of provide it in lay people's terms. So basically what Michael's saying is basically more like talk therapy versus like medication.
Pills. Right.
Yeah.
So what we've discovered is talk therapy, and a very particular form of talk therapy, along with helping somebody schedule things, actually turns out to be more effective than a pill. And if you run out of your pills, you've got a big problem on your hands. But talk therapy is something that's a tool that you'll have within you forever. So let me break down what is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, because I think people here, this would be a great audience to learn about that. So there's two portions, right? There's the cognitive and then there's the behavioral. I start personally focusing on the behavioral first because it's easier to get people to follow a few simple rules about their sleep. So the first thing is, from a behavior standpoint, I have them complete what's called a sleep diary. So it's exactly what you think. It's about 10 questions. You wake up in the morning and you fill it out. What time did I go to bed? What time do I think I fell asleep? How many times did I wake up in the middle of the night? For how long? What time did I get out of bed? How do I feel in the morning? Stuff like that. I have people complete that for 1 week just to get a baseline and understand, okay, how bad is it, right? Then the very first thing I do is I look at their wake up time. So most people's wake up time is very, very consistent until Saturday morning and Sunday morning. And then it's usually significantly later. So that's usually the place that I start first, is I want people to have a consistent wake up time 7 days a week. Let me explain why. When you wake up in the morning, a timer is set in your brain to produce melatonin, which is kind of the key that starts the engine for sleep at night. So if you have a variable wake up time, it changes the time that melatonin is produced at night. If you have a consistent wake up time, melatonin is produced consistently at night. And that's kind of like your internal sleeping pill. That's kind of like the internal Ambien, if you will, that's letting you fall asleep. So what we really are looking for here is to get people to wake up at the same time. Now, the problem, that's not a problem because work usually forces them to wake up, but their bedtime becomes an issue. So what I actually do is we do a technique called sleep restriction, which is where, let's say you're waking up at 6:30 and you normally go to bed at 10 o'clock. I'm going to have you go to bed at midnight, right? Still waking up at 6:30. So I'm restricting the amount of time that you have to sleep. Now most people with insomnia, they think this is the craziest idea in the universe, right? Because they're saying, Michael, I don't sleep well already. Are you kidding me? You're asking me to stay up 2 hours past my bedtime? Then I'm not going to sleep well and I'm going to feel like even worse. What are you talking about? Exactly. The goal here is to increase your own natural sleep deprivation. So what I would do is go to bed at midnight, wake up at 6:30, no naps during the day, go to bed at midnight, wake up at 6:30. And you do this for 5 to 7 days, you're going to get tired. And that natural sleep deprivation is going to build for you. Then when you start going to bed, you're out the whole time. If I get you a solid 12 to 6:30, most people out there would be thrilled, right? Then I can stair step you out, keeping the 6:30 constant, and I can maybe have you go to bed 11:45 for 2 weeks and then 11:30 for 2 weeks. Now we've got a reasonable amount of sleep, but what we have to do is condense it first, get it solid, and then slowly stair step it out. That's just the behavioral part of cognitive behavioral therapy for sleep. So while I'm doing all of that, I give you a form called the Attitudes and Beliefs About Sleep form. And this helps me identify all kinds of crazy thoughts that you have about sleep. Let me give you a couple of examples. A lot of people say to themselves, if I don't get a good night's sleep, it's taking years off the back end of my life. There's no truth to that data whatsoever.
Really?
Right?
Oh, that's good to know.
None, right? Exactly. It's good to know. And so that's what happens is once you learn that, you don't get anxiety about it any longer. And then you're not as worried about it. And so I start to attack these thoughts. And what I do, the way I do it is I call it doing the math. And so every time you tell me of something belief that you have about sleep, I go out and I find the data to show that that's actually not true. And it's not just my experience. I go and find research studies for people because people say, oh, Dr. Breus, you're just telling me that to make me change my behavior. No. I've got a research study from the New England Journal of Medicine that says that this is exactly what is really going on with your sleep. And so then they start to say, oh, well, now that I have this new information, I'm not as anxious, right? And now we start to be able to fall asleep better. So it really ties very, very nicely together. I will tell you in maybe 20 to 30% of the cases, I don't actually have to get to the cognitive part. The behavioral part just seems to fix it all and people are happy. And so I say, go on, sleep, have a great time. But there is a decent number of people where I will actually do the cognitive part, and the therapeutic part. And that's where I would also tell you that, and I haven't talked about this on a podcast before, but I think it's very true, is I think when we're really looking at the basis of sleep problems, I think it's fear. Right. I think that, well, think about it. When are you more vulnerable than when you're asleep? Right. You have to be in a safe environment, right? You have to have a safe surroundings and you have to feel safe in order to close your eyes and be unconscious, right? That's important. If you have any fears, if you have relationship fears, if you have financial fears, if you have, physical issues, like whatever your fear is, that I would argue is blocking your ability to sleep, right? And so when we really dig deep into it, it gets pretty interesting pretty quickly, which is why cognitive behavioral therapy, I think, works so well.
Yeah, I love that you take both let's treat the symptoms, but also let's treat the root of the problem as well.
Yeah.
And as you said, most people would be pretty happy if they could just get a solid 12 to 6.
Yeah.
So how does someone know whether they actually have quality sleep or not?
Great question. Great question. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. One is you can buy a tracker, right? So this thing that's on my finger is called an Aura ring. I have no affiliation with them. But it's one of the things that I use to track my patients. But I'm going to be honest with you. I don't like it. And I'll tell you why. It's not that I don't like it, the ring itself. What I have discovered is when people actually write things out in their sleep diary, it's so much more effective than looking at a screen and seeing what their data is. Right. And so for me, I actually require all of my patients to paper, pencil, write out how they slept with a sleep diary every night. Now, if some of my patients, they're kind of a little type A and they want to know a lot more and they like to metric things. And so they use these trackers. So the trackers can be helpful, but I want to be very clear with people out there. Don't worry about the actual numbers. Angela, I can't count the number of people that walk up to me and say, Dr. Breus, my Oura ring says I only got 14 minutes of deep sleep. What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean, actually?
I'll tell you, it means nothing. Okay? Let me explain. If every single night it says you're getting 14 minutes of sleep, that's perfect. Because what that means is it is being consistently inaccurate.
Okay.
Right? But it's consistent. That's the factor. If you read 14 one night, 407 the next, and 362 the next, I want to know what happened on those 2 nights. Because I'm interested in the delta. I'm not interested in the single point. So don't focus. So many people get lost in the metrics. Oh, Dr. Breus, I don't have enough of this. I don't have enough of that. You're wrong. Okay. The body and the brain are incredibly smart, much smarter than you are. Right? This unit has been around for thousands of years and it's been doing it pretty well, generally speaking. So I think that most people, when they tell me things like, oh, I've got to get 8 hours of sleep. No, you don't. Sleep is flexible. Okay. Our bodies know what we need and it will help us get there. Only time it messes up is when we put hurdles in front of our body. What's a typical hurdle? Alcohol. What's a typical hurdle? Caffeine. What's a typical hurdle? Staying up to watch Netflix past my bedtime, right? So when we do these behaviors that are, quite frankly, pretty stupid when it comes to sleep, probably fine earlier in the day, but really not a good idea at night, we are making it worse for ourselves. And I think that's part of the problem.
Well, my understanding is, there are these stages of sleep, non-rapid eye movement or
Correct.
non-REM and versus REM stages. And that each stage does slightly different things for the body.
Absolutely.
So when you talk about, do I need to understand whether my body's getting enough REM sleep or non-REM sleep or enough, do I have to think about that level of technicality?
No, you don't. Your body does it for you. In fact, I would argue that when people do try to think of that level of granularity and technicality, I think they make things worse, not better. Right? We're looking for trends here. Like now, to be clear, I know exactly what I'm looking at when I'm looking at your stage 3 sleep and your REM sleep. And you might too, based on your background, but 99% of the people out there don't. Right? And so why try to be an expert in something that you're not an expert in? Right? That's what I tell people all the time. And so if you're going to track your sleep, which is fine, relax. Okay? Like you are your best doctor. No question about it. When you wake up in the morning, how do you feel? If you feel bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, you're probably sleeping just fine. If you wake up and you are dragging, you feel terrible, you think you need a cup of coffee to start your day, you have got a quality sleep problem. So what do you do about that? There's a couple of different things. One, you can get a sleep study done. By the way, these are much easier to get now that COVID showed up. Historically, we would have to send you to a lab, right? And by the way, that would take 6 weeks to get you in because we only had 4 beds and there was a wait line. Once we got you in, you'd spend one night. You'd have 27 electrodes attached to your body. It would be a very uncomfortable evening. 2 days later, you would show up in my office. Somebody would have taken all of that data, scored it, given it to me. I would then take a look at it. I would tell you, hey, you got sleep apnea. Then I would send you back to the lab. You'd have to have a second night with treatment so I could make sure that it worked. This whole process could take 7 or 8 weeks. Okay. Since COVID, I can do the whole process in 72 hours.
Wow.
Right. So what you do is now home sleep tests are all available. Believe it or not, you could go onto my website and for less than $200, you can actually order a sleep test to your home. No problem. You push the button, you get a schedule, you get an online schedule, you do a teledoc session with one of our board certified sleep specialists. We have them board certified in all 50 states, so we can take anybody from anywhere. You have your consult with them. They push a button and a sleep study is immediately shipped to your home. You wear it on your wrist with a little thing on your finger. No other electrodes. Super easy, right? Go to sleep. When you wake up, all that information goes to your phone, goes to the internet. There's a doctor that reads it. You get your diagnosis and your treatment in 72 hours.
Interesting. And so I think that there are actually probably going to be a lot of people who will say that they wake up and they still feel tired, even if they got 8 hours sleep. And so
that's a quality issue, not a quantity issue.
Exactly.
And that's why I would say do a sleep study, because if you got 8 hours and you feel like crap, we want to know what's going on. Probably sleep
You said
apnea.
There was another thing that you might do when investigating quality of sleep. What else would you do beyond the sleep study?
So I would do sleep study. I could do I could do the ring or the tracker, or I could do sleep diary. Those would be the three big things that I would do. Oh, and then I would do blood work. That would be the final thing, because that's another reason why people might wake up feeling tired. I can't count, Angela, the number of people that come up to me and they're like, Michael, what's the best supplement for sleep? Right. And so my theory is very, very different than most doctors out there. Here's what I say. Go do blood work. Tell me what you're deficient in first. Are you deficient in magnesium, vitamin D, iron, melatonin? Those are the four biggies that I'm interested in. If you're deficient in any one of those, let's fix that first. And then let's see how this unit does. Like I tell people all the time, nobody out there is deficient in ashwagandha, right? While it might be helpful and it might be something that calms you down, you don't necessarily need it, but you do need vitamin D, you do need magnesium, and you do need iron for your body to work. So let's get that part of it fixed first, and then let's see what's out there. And by the way, I would say easily 50% of the time when I fix those deficiencies, sleep fixes itself.
That's great. And you talked about how, that each person and what they require is very variable.
Yeah.
And when we just talked about quality of sleep, let's talk about quantity of sleep. Is there such thing as just not, not enough hours or too much hours?
Yeah, I think there is. So as an example, not enough. I think lower level limit for almost everyone out there is 5.5 hours. Because here's the thing, once you hit 5.5 hours, you can't drive a car real well. Right? Your reaction time is off. So for me, I tell everybody, if you get 5.5 hours or less, don't drive a car. You need to see a sleep specialist. That is not normal. That's not what you want to be doing. On the other side of things, I have patients who turn to me and they say, oh, Dr. Breus, I don't have any sleep problems. I sleep 9.5 hours every night. Wrong. You probably have narcolepsy, depression, or sleep apnea that's making you sleep longer in order to try to get better sleep. So most people should fall into that 7 to 9 hour range, maybe 6.5. I would stretch it even to 6 for some folks, but 6 to 9 is what you're looking at. If you're on either side of those goalposts, I think it's a problem.
Interesting. And so, so then someone is really committed to wanting to sleep better, and they, for example, don't have any issues falling asleep. But as you mentioned, often the stress, the fear, the anxiety might wake you up. So you actually don't feel that you can get into a point where you could really relax and fall into meaningful sleep. What happens, when someone is now up at 3 a.m. trying really hard to go back to bed?
Yeah, I have a whole spiel. So everybody sit down for a second. It's going to take me about 3 minutes to get through this whole thing. But this is the number 2 question that I get asked, bar none. Okay, is what do you do if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and can't fall back to sleep? Okay, so let's talk about it. Also, by the way, we'll put this in the show notes on my YouTube channel, The Sleep Doctor. The number 1 video that I have, almost 6 million views, answers this question. Okay. So when we're going to sleep, I'm going to teach you the biology of this whole thing. When we're going to sleep, your core body temperature rises, and it hits a peak around 10:30 at night. And then it begins to drop. That drop signals to the brain to release melatonin. Okay. Melatonin, again, is the key that starts the engine for sleep. It's not the only thing that you need, but you have to have melatonin going in order to sleep. Your core body temperature continues to drop. At some point in time, it has to rise. Otherwise, your body goes hypothermic, right? And you freeze to death and you die, right? I'll give you one guess what time it gets warmer in the middle of the night.
One guess.
What did you just tell me a second ago?
It's when I wake up.
Exactly.
The body,
3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Every human on earth, everyone listening, you, me, everyone wakes up between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning. Here's the rub. Most of us don't know it. 95% of people roll over and they fall back asleep. They don't even remember it. By the way, you have to be awake for almost 60 seconds to even realize that you're awake. So it's very easy for you to get to a lighter stage of sleep or wake up and then fall right back asleep. The problem is the people who ask me this question don't. They don't fall back asleep. So let's talk about that situation right there. Okay. So first of all, it's normal, right? This is a biological function. This is exactly what your body is supposed to do. For some reason, you're up. Don't worry about it. I'm going to show you how to get back to sleep. So the first thing you're going to want to do is not pee. So everybody, when they wake up in the middle of the night, says, hey, I'm up. I might as well go pee. Bad idea. Let me explain. Okay. There's one metric that's super duper important for going back to sleep. In order to enter into a state of unconsciousness, you need a heart rate of 60 or below. Okay. What do you think happens when you are lying down, sit up, walk across the room and go to the bathroom? Your heart rate goes straight up. Okay. Also, a lot of people will flip on a light to go to the bathroom. You just told your brain it's morning and it stops producing melatonin. So number one, if you do have to go, I want to be clear, please go pee. But if you have to go pee, put a nightlight on the way and a nightlight in the toilet closet so that way you don't have to turn on the light, and then come back. But to be clear, most people shouldn't have to pee in the middle of the night. You should have stopped fluids about an hour before bed, and that should be very, very helpful in you not having to get disrupted at night. Okay, we peed, we came back. The next big problem that most people do is they look at the clock. This is the worst idea that you could possibly have, is looking at the clock. Why? Because you instantly do the mental math and now you're pissed, right? You are angry. It's 3:30 in the morning. I've got to get up at 6. Sleep, right? And you try to force yourself to sleep. Dr. Angela, in the history of time, no one has ever forced themselves to sleep, right? Because think about it. You're pushing your energy in one direction and it really should be going in the opposite direction, right? My heart rate is increasing. I'm trying to force myself to sleep. And what I really need to be doing is relaxing, right? Calming myself down, lowering my heart rate. So I'm not so foolish as to think, by the way, that nobody's going to pee and nobody's going to look at the clock. I know you are, but you need to understand what it's doing to your body, because we now have to overcome that hurdle, which is we now have to lower your heart rate. By the way, there's another problem that's about to happen in the middle of the night. It's called monkey mind, right? Once you start thinking about something, it's really hard to stop. And if you're thinking about anything that's emotional, like your kids or your job or money or something like that, forget it. You're now up for 3 hours and you haven't solved any problems. It's 6 a.m. You've only gotten 3 hours of sleep and you are upset, right? So we have to avoid monkey mind. Michael, how on earth do I avoid monkey mind and still lower my heart rate at the same time? I've got the answer for you. It's called 4-7-8 breathing. So this is a breathing technique that was developed by Dr. Andrew Weil for the Navy snipers. So if you're a Navy sniper and you're shooting downrange, if your heart is beating too fast, you can actually change the trajectory of the bullet. So they taught the snipers how to lower their heart rate so they could shoot in between heartbeats. The good news for us is they were teaching them to get below 60 beats per minute, which is kind of our magic number. So let me explain the technique, why it works, and then a variation on the technique that everybody can try tonight. So the technique is quite simple. You slowly breathe in for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 7, you breathe out for a count of 8. Okay. Very, very simple. Let me explain the biology of what's going on here. So most people are very shallow breathers. They only use about half of their lung. And so in order to get the right amount of oxygen distributed to the body, the heart has to beat twice as much because you're only using half of your lungs to do so. By doing 4-7-8 breathing, you breathe in for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 7, you've used up all that air. And when you expel for a count of 8, you have now released all of that air. And when you breathe in, you are forced to use the entire lung. What this does is it makes your heart rate drop in half, right? Because now you've got double the volume of air to push around your body. So it makes intuitive sense. Now, there is one variation for folks out there. I'll be honest with you. It took me a while to be able to hold till 7 and push out until 8. So I created a variation, which is called 4-5-6 breathing. So breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 5, push for a count of 6. The numbers don't matter as much as just the pushing the air and being comfortable doing it. And it's a very slow in and slow out. A couple other points of importance here is you need to do 10 to 12 cycles of this in order to drop your heart rate to where we want you to drop your heart rate. However, there's a problem. I came across this problem. So to be clear, I've had this issue before myself. This is how I determined a lot and dealing with my patients. So while I'm in the middle of the night doing my 4-7-8 breathing, I lose count. And it's stressful. And then I've gone and done the opposite of what I wanted to do. So what I do is when I'm laying there, I take my hands like this, and I make 2 small fists. And then when I do 1, 4, 7, 8, I stick out a finger. Then when I do the second 4, 7, 8, I stick out a second finger. And by the time I get to 10 fingers, I know I've done 10 cycles. Then I slowly allow myself to get into the breath and move into more of like a box breathing, like a 4-4-4 type of breathing, just again, slow yourself down. Now you might be saying, okay, I did my 10 cycles. My heart is low. I still haven't fallen asleep. My mind might be starting to wander. Now, why wasn't your mind wandering during 4-7-8 breathing? Because you're counting and you cannot think about things that upset you while you count. So here's the second technique that you do at the end of 10 to 12 cycles of 4-7-8 is you count backwards from 300 by 3s. It is mathematically so complicated you can't think of anything else, and it is so damn boring, your mind starts to drift, the natural sleep process takes over, and there you go, right? So in the middle of the night, the key factor here, lowering your heart rate and not getting more anxious. You've been there before. This is nothing new, right? Let me give you 2 other hints of importance in the middle of the night. One is called non-sleep deep rest, also known as yoga nidra. Okay. When you look at the data on yoga nidra, it's quite fascinating. But if you lie there for an hour, it's kind of like getting about 20 minutes of sleep. So if all else fails, you've done my 4-7-8 breathing, you've counted backwards from 300 by 3s, and it still isn't working, but you're nice and relaxed, you're actually doing something that's rejuvenative to you. Lay there for an hour and it's worth 20 minutes of sleep. The final thing is what we just kind of touched on a second ago, which is acceptance. Your body is a lot smarter than you are at 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay. You might think you need 8 hours of sleep, but your body kind of knows the score and your body will get what it needs. For some people, sometimes like I had this happen to me. I was traveling. All of a sudden I woke up at 5:30. I don't know why I woke up at 5:30. I didn't have enough in me to go back asleep. So I went ahead and I accepted it and I started my day by meditating, right? So again, you can actually use that time in the morning as a special time for you. Most people, when it's 3 o'clock in the morning, here's what they say in their head. Ugh, I can't believe I'm back here again. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. This stinks, right? That's the negative spiral that is not helping you at all. What I say to myself, and I know this sounds stupid, and my wife has actually caught me saying it out loud, is I say, awesome. Now I've got some time for me to do something for me. And so for me, I have some things lined up in my head that I want to do. So I'd like to try this new form of breath work that helps me. Or, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to go ahead and get up and bring my dogs into the office and read. Maybe I'll go for a walk. All of these different things. I've got my little time that I can do what I want with. Don't look at it as a negative. Look at it as a positive. And by the way, over the course of time, it will go away. You'll sleep until 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and you'll be fine. I promise.
So, Michael, if let's just say that, for whatever reason, maybe I'm like super stressed. And so it keeps me up. My mind just wouldn't rest, and I'm up at 3 a.m. and I tried all the things that you said and it didn't work. And so I'm taking your advice of just going ahead and getting up.
I forgot to mention the problem. What do you do the next night? That's where everybody messes up. I'm so glad you brought this up. I can't believe I forgot it. This was super smart of you. So here's what people do. Let's say you got up and you couldn't fall back asleep and it was 3 o'clock in the morning or 3:30, right? Now it's 8 o'clock at night and you are dragging ass, right? All you want to do is go to bed. Don't. If you go to bed early, you will mess this all up. You've got to go to bed at your normal later bedtime. Do not get in bed early because your circadian rhythm doesn't know what to do and it's going to mess you up. Great point. I'm so glad you brought that up.
And so if someone, and let's just say maybe actually they're thinking, I can just do a 20-minute nap at 5 p.m. Is it still also a don't
Terrible idea. Cool. You don't want to nap when you're in the middle of dealing with these kind of sleep issues. Because one of the things, remember, let me back up. Sleep is made up of two separate processes in the brain. One is called your sleep drive. The other is called your sleep rhythm. When you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't have a whole lot of sleep drive left, right? And so the later and later you wake up, the harder and harder it's going to be to go back to sleep. And so your brain kind of knows that. And so that part becomes very important. Don't worry, your drive will kick back in again that night. So I don't want you to worry that it's never going to kick back in or that you screwed something up because you haven't.
That's cool. Well, one of the other things is we've talked about the difficulties of sort of when you wake up in the middle of the night. But what if you have the opposite problem, which is that you struggle to fall asleep or that you're a very light sleeper? And so anything and everything will wake you up.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good question as well. So if you're a light sleeper, there's really two different things that you can do. You can kind of create an environment that's helpful for you as a light sleeper. Maybe you have earplugs, maybe you have a noise machine, blackout curtains, eye shade. There's a whole host of things that you can do to kind of change that environment. Or you do the sleep restriction idea and then you power in and then that improves the quality of that sleep and then you can slowly stair step it out. So I would do that with the person who has a hard time falling asleep or somebody who has a hard time in the middle of the night. I don't think it's going to be a big issue kind of like one way or another. But yeah, I agree with you. It can be difficult. The other thing to think about, but if falling asleep is your problem, is you can do 4-7-8 breathing in the front end of the night. Like you don't have to only do it in the back end because it's still going to do the same thing of lowering your heart rate. So to be honest with you, sometimes I do 4-7-8 in the beginning of the night, not the middle.
Yeah. So when does all of this become a sleep disorder? When
Great
do you
question.
kind of say you now have a disorder?
Yep. So what I use and what the American Academy of Sleep Medicine uses is what we call the rule of threes. So if it takes you longer than 30 minutes to fall asleep, or you wake up more than 3 times a night for longer than 30 minutes, that happens for more than 3 nights a week, more than 3 weeks a month, for longer than 3 months, you have insomnia. That's why it's called the
That's
rule
a lot of threes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, if you're having it 3 weeks out of the month, you got insomnia. And it's probably something that you want to talk with your doctor about. The biggest issue, if you think you might have insomnia and you're listening to this, is you're going to go to the drugstore and you're going to think, oh, I can just buy some melatonin or some magnesium or maybe some Tylenol PM or whatever happens to be in your drugstore country, what have you. And sometimes that's legal, sometimes it's not legal. And so you really want to be thoughtful and careful about what you're going to put in your body. Part of the reason that I do everything on the psychology side, the talk therapy side, is because of that very issue is so many people don't react well to drugs. Drugs interact. You've got all kinds of problems. And the data would suggest that behavioral stuff actually works better than pills.
And so actually, while we're on that topic, so if you do need to, for example, take a sleeping pill,
Sure, nothing wrong with that.
Is it that the type of sleep that you have is not as good? Is that what you mean?
So it's a great question. So it depends upon the pill. So old school pills that we used to use for sleep aids called benzodiazepines, those medications would actually make you have an irregular sleep architecture. They were highly addictive. They put you to sleep, but the sleep you got was very poor, light sleep. We moved from that class of drugs to what are called the non-benzodiazepine hypnotics. Ambien, Sonata, Lunesta are the trade names. Those don't affect your sleep architecture. But if you had crappy sleep architecture before, you're still going to have crappy sleep architecture. You're just going to happen to sleep. What we're waiting for are the drugs. I call them the Frankenstein drugs because they're the drugs that are going to like change the way you sleep. There's really only one drug on the market that we've seen that actually gives people a little bit more deep sleep. It's called gabapentin or Neurontin. There's data to show that it can actually improve sleep for a lot of people. But again, all of this can be done naturally if you don't have. I like to use pills to break the cycle of insomnia, keep somebody on it for about 3 months, taper them off while teaching them how to sleep, and then they're done. Good. And that's a 3-month trial. We can get people through it fairly quickly. And it works really, really well. To be clear, if there's folks out there who are listening or watching who are on sleeping pills, there's no shame in that at all. That is a relationship between you and your doctor, and you have determined that you need one of these pills. I think of it sometimes a lot the way I think of high blood pressure. Like you can eat right and you can exercise and you still need a pill because your blood pressure is high. So there are some people who have insomnia who are just going to need a pill. That's okay. The question becomes, does it escalate in dosage? How long are you on it for? Those are the questions that you want to start thinking about and talking about with your doctor.
So let's change tack. You talked about sort of the 6 to 9 hours is a healthy quantity of sleep. But does it matter when you sleep? So for example, I'm just someone who has to work a night shift. That's just my job. So I will always have to sleep my 8 hours during the day. Is there a difference if that happens?
Yes, there is. You're getting worse quality sleep. People who are sleeping when it's light out, we have higher suicidality, we have higher depression, we have higher anxiety, we have all kinds of higher immune function problems, like the list goes on and on. What you bring up is two interesting points that I think are worthwhile discussing. One is shift work, right? So what do you do if you work the night shift, right? Because that's a whole different ball game. The other question is, do you sleep following something called your chronotype? So a chronotype is like early bird or night owl. That's the thing that I'm most famous for is my third book, The Power of When. I created a chronotype system of lion, bear, wolf, and dolphin that people can take over on chronoquiz.com. And that helps you figure out like what bedtime you should be if you have like a daytime job. But when you're talking about having to work at night, that's really a whole different ballgame. So when I do that for folks, what I'm usually doing is it's almost like I'm treating them for jet lag every single day, right? So what I'll do is I'll have them take melatonin in the morning. I'll have them use light therapy after they wake up. I may actually use caffeine strategically for them in the evening time. So there's a couple of different things that I can do and manipulate where I can get them there. But I want to be clear, there's actually an app out there that will do this for you, either the jet lag or the shift work. It's called Time Shifter, TIMESHIFTER. We can put it in the show notes if people want. It's a great app. Full disclosure, I am both an investor in the app and partial developer of the app. But we just crossed our millionth user, and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Committee, is interested in maybe having us use it on pilots all over the world. We've got it in several different airlines. So it's pretty cool that we've kind of figured that jet lag problem out. It's actually a math problem and it's super easy to figure out. Also with shift work, it works the same way. So I would encourage people to check out that Time Shifter because it's going to do a really good job.
Oh, yeah. And there are definitely people who need to travel and so would be jet lagged, and there are people who have to work shift work. And it sounds like what you're trying to say is like when you put in those situations, as best as you can mimic an environment of a normal sleep environment
Yeah.
to trick your brain to fall back into that pattern is kind of what you're trying to do.
I think that's part of it, but I think the other part is you have to use melatonin because your whole body, your circadian rhythm is completely shifted. If you don't use something to change it, it's going to just take you a day for every time zone crossed for your body to naturally adapt.
That makes sense. So I love for you to talk a little bit about this part of your book. You talked about chronotypes. So, can you maybe share a little bit more about what you've learned about the different chronotypes? And
Sure.
what if your partner is a different
type of chronotype? Oh yeah, that can be a difficult problem, right?
Yeah.
So I've definitely talked a lot about chronotypes before, but for folks out there, I've discovered a way that there are 4 different chronotypes, right? There's early bird, people in the middle, night owls, and somebody's got an irregular sleep schedule, what I'm calling a dolphin. Okay. So, when you figure out your chronotype by going to chronoquiz.com, now you've kind of got this secret unlock to do some super cool things. The question that you're asking, which I think is a really relevant one, and it's also one of the biggest questions that I get asked is, what if I'm married to or in a relationship with an early bird and I am a night owl? Like, how is that going to work? Right? So number one, it's not easy. The good news is if you actually have recognized this, it can be very helpful. A lot of people don't even think about it. And so they have no idea. They're just like, oh, my husband's so lazy. All he wants to do is sleep in the morning and I want to get up and go for a run, or the opposite is true. Right. And so you have to, number one, test each other to figure out what your chronotypes are. That's for step number one. But number two, the book does a great job of showing people how to utilize different things together. So the biggest question is intimacy, right? So when can we be intimate? If I'm an early bird and you're a night owl, this isn't going to work out too well. Don't worry. In the book, what we did was we actually did surveys and we figured it out. And so it's quite interesting, but what we discovered was basically you need 5 hormones to have successful intimacy. You need estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, adrenaline, and cortisol all need to be elevated. And melatonin, the sleep hormone, it needs to be low, right? When we did the survey, I think it was something like 70-something% of people have sex between 10:30 and 11:30 at night. What do you think your hormone profile looks like? Right? Melatonin is high and all those other ones are low. So that's hint number one. Number two is if you're being intimate with somebody who was born biologically male, what do most men wake up with in the morning? An erection. If that is not Mother Nature telling you when to use that thing, I don't know what is. Okay. So one of the things that we can discover is what is the best time for intimacy can be different based on your chronotype. So example is if you're an early morning, an early riser, what I call a lion, there's no universe where you want to have sex at 10 o'clock at night. You're exhausted. You've been up since 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, right? You'd much rather be intimate in the morning time, maybe after you brush your teeth, but you know what I'm saying? Like you'd much rather be intimate in the morning time because you're awake. So when we did the survey and we started looking at people and asking people questions, women discovered that they had better connection when they were intimate based on their chronotype, and men actually found that their performance was actually better. So they had longer erections, harder erections, things like that. So it really works out very well if you can figure out what your chronotype is and then adjust. Now, in the book, The Power of When, I actually created a matrix. So you can put your chronotype on one side and your partner's chronotype on the other. And I give you an early evening and an early morning time to experiment to see what works.
And so is the premise of the book that figuring out your chronotype and then actually optimizing for your chronotype is when you're gonna, not just for intimacy, but just general.
Everything. Yeah. I've optimized for my chronotype for example, talking to my daughter. Like I have a 22-year-old daughter and, when I was writing this book, which was a while ago, she was in high school. And when I would walk into her room in the morning, I would say, hey, Carson, what's going on today? And she's like, oh, leave me alone. Right. But if I walked into her room at, let's say 12:30, 1 o'clock, and I said, hey, Carson, what are you doing today? I'd get a 90-minute conversation with my daughter.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm not sure there's anything more important in my life than a 90-minute conversation with my daughter.
That's
right?
Awesome. Absolutely.
So it's like this became a social tool. Like we didn't expect it. Like I just did this because I thought it was cool and that we could teach people some stuff about sleep. It's turned into something much bigger. Like people are chronotyping their whole families and then say, oh, he's a wolf right now, so we don't want to talk to him until later tonight about this, because then it's going to be a much more successful conversation. And it is. So it's really kind of this cool unlock. It's one of my favorite things I've ever had the opportunity to do. In the new book, Sleep, Drink, Breathe, we actually review chronotypes again, and I give people a few more insights about how to do some of those things. Because now that I've got you sleeping, I need you hydrated and I need you breathing correctly, because those are the fundamentals of wellness. That's really what we want people to understand is like, hey, if you can get these three things right, don't worry about your green drink or your sauna or whatever. Just if you get these three things right, you're on the good path.
And it would be remiss for us to not discuss, sleep hygiene. And,
Sure.
You sort of mentioned, some people do silly things like have coffee at 6 p.m. before they go to bed.
Right.
Like, what are the common mistakes people make in the context of sleep hygiene?
Here's what I would tell you is there's actually been a study that was done looking at strictly sleep hygiene, what is considered like the sleep hygiene rules. You're not going to believe this. It does nothing. It does absolutely nothing. Okay. So, but there are certain things that you can do that will completely mess you up. So if all you did was sleep in a dark room with no television on, and no lights, it's probably not going to do you a whole lot of good. To be clear, that's kind of the regular sleep hygiene. What's really interesting is caffeine and alcohol. I would argue those are the two biggest assaulters of sleep by far. Caffeine is probably not as bad as alcohol, believe it or not. The problem is most people, when they drink alcohol, it makes them feel relaxed and sleepy. And so they think it's helping their sleep. And in fact, in the very beginning of their sleep, they may get a little bit more deep sleep, but then the rest of their sleep gets absolutely destroyed. They are usually dehydrated because they've been drinking, and it's making them have to go to the bathroom, which actually changes the whole sleep process. So what I would tell you is there's nothing wrong with a little bit of sleep hygiene. Have a dark room, try not to have a whole lot of noise. To be clear, I sleep with a big screen television on all night long and 2 French bulldogs in my bed next to me with my wife. Okay. You can adapt. Remember, sleep is flexible, right? So you can adapt to a lot of things. However, you can't change biology. And if you drink 5 cups of coffee at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, there's no universe you're going to sleep, right?
But
so
yeah. And you did mention that sort of, the whole part of going to sleep is the ability to shut off the mind and be relaxed. Yeah. And I can't imagine if you're, replying emails before you go to bed, or you're scrolling on social media. Yeah.
I tell people you need runway to land the plane, right? You need time. Sleep isn't an on-off switch. It's like slowly pulling your foot off the gas and slowly putting your foot on the brake. If people tell me, Oprah Winfrey told me this, and I thought it was really interesting. She said Stedman, her boyfriend, falls asleep in like a minute, 30 seconds. And I turned to her and I was like, that's bad. She's like, what are you talking about? I said, he's sleep deprived. She said, oh, now I got something on him. And she did it. We were live on TV. It was in 2004. I was on her show. So it's like, we've got a lot of these misconceptions about sleep. And I want people to understand, like, again, sleep is flexible. Don't get too caught up in the rules, but what's right. Everybody does. And there are very few people out there who are going to turn to me and say having a cup of coffee at 6 o'clock in the afternoon is a good idea for my sleep. There are plenty of people who do it and they say, oh, coffee doesn't affect me. Bullshit. Okay. I'll show you where it affects you. Like, there's no universe. You might not feel it, but I can assure you your body is reacting to it. Alcohol is the same way. People say, oh, I can have, like that. By the way, that's the biggest negotiating point with all of my new patients. Because I say to them, look, we're going to run an experiment. And at some point in time, I'm going to ask you probably to not have any alcohol for a week so we can see how it affects your sleep. Everybody turns cold when I say that. They're like, what? I'm like, well, let's have that conversation. I give them a article about how does alcohol affect their sleep. And then the negotiation starts, right? So, well, how much wine can I have? Well, how about none? Well, I don't think I can do that. Well, do we have a second problem that we're facing here, maybe? Like drinking problem, right? And so then we start walking down that path as well. So I would say that alcohol and caffeine are some of the biggest problems with sleep for sure.
The other thing that you're obviously known for is, the role of sleep in peak performance. Is there anything you want to share that you haven't already shared so far around the role of sleep and performance?
Here's what I would tell you about sleep and peak performance is it's about consistency, right? So it's not about, one night of this or doing one thing here or having some supplement there. It's about night after night after night consistency and just kind of working in the layers, because the consistency is really important, because when the bad night happens, you need to be able to snap back the next night. And the only way that happens is if you've got a lot of consistency behind you. Everybody has bad nights. I have bad nights. You have bad nights. Shit happens, right? That's fine, but you've got to be able to snap back. So I would say the one big thing for performance is consistency.
What is the one well-being habit that you do to stay mentally well?
Oh, that's a great one. So my one mental health habit is, in the morning time, after I walk my dogs, I sit on the floor with them for 2 or 3 minutes and I play with them every single morning. And it is the best time that I have.
Oh, amazing. I thought you were going to say sleep.
Sleep's good, but I get a lot from my dogs.
Nice.
Companionship, it's important.
That's it for today's episode. If you want to find out more about us, visit clearhead.org.nz. Love our content? Share with a friend or leave us a comment on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. If you want to learn more about how Clearhead can support your workplace, or you have a burning mental health question that you'd like us to explore on the podcast, you can reach us at contact@clearhead.org.nz. Thank you so much again for listening, and catch you on the next one.